So some of the work that I do and some of the context to help fill it in from the economic development perspective. One of the things when we look at housing that I think about is important to understand the relationship with industry. So that's one thing that's not necessarily always talked about, but anytime, so I've got an industrial park in St. Stephen, I want people to come in, and first two questions that they often ask when I'm looking at a new employer is to say, how much housing do you have available? What's your workforce availability? What's their training? How many people are available to work? What training do they have? And obviously do you have land and services in the industrial park, but do you have housing for the people? If not, why am I coming? Like I can throw up a shop and it means nothing, right? So looking at industry and growth and all of that is important to look at housing as well. So that's a big piece to keep in demand. So you can't attract newcomers who want to come. You can't attract a lot of things if you're not keeping some of these relationships. And a lot of economic development is being stuck in the middle of a spider web of influencing factors. Okay, so that's kind of what we do, is try and navigate all of those and help the spider webs line up, that the right webs are connecting to the right piece and the line doesn't drop somewhere and it all falls apart. Okay. One of the things to keep in mind too that hasn't been talked about yet, but is really important, and if there's developers in the room, they'll mention this, but is infrastructure. Okay, so infrastructure is a key component when looking at housing. When you look at the maps and what we've done, some of the things we've tried to highlight where new housing can go, and part of that's based on existing infrastructure, because municipalities are at the point where most of them are turning over existing infrastructure and taking on huge costs to do that. And they're saying, I can't run another 200 meters of water, sewer, and road to bring in a new development. And the developer goes, I don't want to pay for it. And the municipality goes, guess what? I don't want to pay for it. And RDC, Francine left, but she's not wanting to pay for it either, right? Nobody wants to pay for infrastructure, because you're looking at it going, how's this going to pay itself off in the next 20 years? So we have to be thinking about, when we're thinking about housing, what does that mean for relationship to infrastructure? And that's a huge piece. In larger municipalities, what you can start doing is, because of total demand, you can start to push that onto the developers, right? And to say, total demand means, well, sorry, you got to absorb this cost somewhere in your plan. In small rural communities, we don't have that option. You push back and you say, sorry, you need to take on infrastructure costs, and the developer goes, yeah, I didn't kind of want to travel from St. John anyways. Okay, I'll just go over there, right? So these are pieces we need to take into consideration, and what role do federal funders, provincial funders play into that? How do you look at infill housing as much as possible, which is one of the things that we try and do. Focus on that and say, increase the population density. We're moving from single family dwelling homes as a majority of the makeup of our, of our communities, and, maybe turning 1-unit buildings into 3-unit buildings, and not all of them, but figuring out what that means to get that density in there. And when you talk with people, listen to planners from Toronto and stuff like that, this is a huge focal point, to say, what level of density do we need in what areas to make it make sense. So in rural areas, we need to think about that too. So when you're encouraging something, you're looking at a space to develop and build, really think about infrastructure, really think about where that cost is going to come from to support that, because it lasts about, so far, 50 years, right? So we're turning over a lot of infrastructure right now that's 50 years old, and how are we planning for the next 50 years? At 50 years from now, one of the things I think about is, are we going to be at population decline globally? The stats say yes. Somewhere between 2050 and 2070, population decline. Does that mean population decline globally for our region? We don't know yet, right? Will immigration keep coming here for that long period of time? Maybe. But we have to start thinking about infrastructure and total community sizes through those lenses. How long do we invest in new infrastructure to do that? So that's a piece that's worth talking about. Another piece that we've focused on in economic development is all the background stuff. So what's all the background stuff that creates barriers for developers, and how do we try and knock some of that out of the way? The Service Commission has been great in working with us in St. Stephen and adjusting our zoning bylaw so that it's more and more conducive to development. So we bring developers into that conversation, the municipality into that conversation, economic development into that conversation, to try and get a productive thing, because those are the rules. Once you decide on that, those are the rules, and you got to abide by them, right? PRAC can only, or the Planning Commission, or Planning Advisory Commission can only go so far in amending certain things, or
And it takes time.
yeah,
It takes time and effort, and you got
yeah, to get variances, right? You don't want to rely on the variances. You want to have good rules that make sense. So getting those things in is really good. And one of the things we've worked on is to get those pieces in place and those working relationships in place. Right now, we've got a good benefit in St. Stephen, where CAO is at the back of the room, and I talk to him constantly. And we have a good working relationship. With the mayor, a good working relationship. Some people come in, they call the mayor first. Some people come in, they call the CAO first. Some people come in and they call me first. But we've got to loop together and make sure what's going on makes sense in the background, you know, and that it's lining up. We need a town council that understands the priorities and is working with us towards the priorities and is going to approve things that make sense. You can't underestimate the value of those working relationships in a community, that they all work together, because that's what takes the barriers out of the way for the developers. Any kind of housing, right? So that's a piece that we've been working on. I think another thing, oh, right, you said the numbers came in. So if anyone didn't read it yet, David Campbell put out a piece this morning and said New Brunswick brought in 21,000 people last year from July to 2021 to June 2022. That's an increase in population for New Brunswick in 1 year of 2.7%. The census data released a year ago, right, or collected a year ago, said that Charlotte County, over 5 years, raised by about 2.2, 2.3%. The whole province grew by 2.7% in 1 year. We know some of that came here. Proportionally, did that much come here? Maybe not. So these numbers, just like Xander would say, we're done this year. You've got to keep them fresh in your head. What's the actual context on the ground? We've had a surge because of COVID, largely. Is it going to keep going? It might depend partially on marketing. It might partially depend on different things. Remote work is a new reality that a whole bunch of people are looking at and looking at our communities at, right? Does your community have internet infrastructure? You know, do you have access to Starlink, ExploreNet, if you don't have physical internet infrastructure? These are really important things for who you're attracting and who's living in your community. So that's a few pieces. I think the last thing that I wanted to point to is a piece that we worked on with the Service Commission. And we have to put a tip of the hat to the town, because the town mostly pays my bill and also has contracted work with the Service Commission to do its planning. We put together a developer guide, and it was produced last year. It was updated just recently. There's more. We don't have the Turner and Drake information integrated into here yet, so we have to refresh it for that. But what we did is we put it together and said, here's parcels, together with the information from the municipality, the Service Commission, ECDEV. We sat down and said, these are the most desirable parcels for multi-unit residential development in our community. Here are the actual PIDs, the acreage, the dimensions, the zoning, the ownership, how far it is to essential services, gas line, water line, etc. And is it provincially owned, privately owned, municipally owned? And we've packaged them and said, this is our kind of like our top 10. And when developers ask, we hand it out to them. It's again to say, you know, some people will focus on certain pieces of land and say we should work on this or we should work on that. We're like, well, we think you should work on these ones, you know, and to try and take again some of those barriers out of the way. One small thing we're doing as a part of this initiative is we're turning this into a template, and so that any community in New Brunswick that wants can do this for your community. Plug and play the PIDs and the different pieces. Yep.
Can I ask you to put an additional piece of information that will keep everybody in this room much happier?
Yeah, sure.
Put the number of units or the unit mix type that the zoning allows easily without everybody asking for permission.
So
it's not always easy to identify that it's a 24-unit lot, but if you can put the max number of units that zoning will allow to at least tell developers, okay, this can support 40 units.
What do you think? Can we do that? Can we translate that down there?
Yeah, the infrastructure would have to go in there too.
Yeah.
But if that's useful, we can work on it.
That could be a future evolution of it.
Yeah, it's just a density.
Yeah, in the spirit of
cooperation session, we're doing that as well. Students who we met this summer, we actually wrote an algorithm, which is just a giant if statement, to actually do that. So we've actually done that. We'll talk about that later.
Okay, great, we'll do it.
Yeah.
So,
This is collaboration, right?
yes,
here. I love
exactly.
it.
So, and we're working with Peter a lot in the background too. So the idea is that this becomes a template that any community, especially in rural New Brunswick, can use to highlight the spaces available in your community, okay? So we've done a lot of that background work so you can see what it is and go and run and do the same thing in your own community. It's one tool, it's one piece, but it's one way to move it forward.
So once that template is available, will it go on the Service Commission website?
I'm working on that right now. So the tech person who's
If every municipality in the province can access that, put it in one location,
yeah,
then a developer from St. Stephen can look anywhere in the province.
exactly.
Yeah.
So
We're working on that as well.
yep. Great. So we're working exactly what the sharing mechanism is for it once the template's ready. So yeah. So that's a bit of my piece. I think I'll let Glenn.
I got very few things to say, and I won't try to get down into the weeds too much. First of all, I guess, well, like who the heck is Glenn Hawkins? Well, really no one. A few years ago, I started to think and try to understand as to why our community wasn't growing. In my lifetime, I was lucky enough to have a good job, and my wife have a good job, and we were able to provide for my kids, etc. But there's a lot of people in the area that don't have the same opportunities. And I started to think about, okay, well, why did Sussex grow and Blacks Harbour, St. George area not, right? And so, in the very soon, we're going to have municipal elections. And at these sessions, I hear a lot of discussion about the developer, and I hear a lot of discussion about CMHC. But who's going to build our community? We are. We can get help from the provincial government, and we can get help from the federal government, but the municipality has got to decide it's a priority and they want to do it. And in my discussions with councillors in the area, and I won't mention where or who, there's a wide range of understanding of the business case for development in the area. And the areas that are growing have the lowest tax rate. And the areas that aren't growing typically have the highest tax rate and the least services. So, if you want Eastern Charlotte to grow, then the councillors have to understand the business case for the investment. I had an example here a while ago where I was trying to talk to a mayor and council, or actually, it was the CAO and the councillor, on making a $300,000 investment. And I said, hey, we can increase the tax base by 20 million. And the councillor said, we're not borrowing any money. And I said, well, do you know your tax rate? He did. I said, do you know how much you get per $1 million for that tax rate? He didn't. So, some understand it very well, some don't understand it at all, and they're going to be the future leaders of the community, and we have to make sure that we give them the help to understand the business for the investments, because they're not borrowing and costs, they're investments. St. Andrews is doing a great job, St. Stephen has done a lot, and there's pockets in other areas, but really, we have to build our community, and the province isn't going to save us. We have to decide we want to change. And some don't. Anyway, so I won't get down into the weeds. The weeds will fix themselves if we fix the high-level thinking.
I got one more thought I wanted to throw in from my notes that I didn't cover while I was up here. But when we're looking at affordable housing and moving that, because that becomes a big topic at places like this, one of the things that I've been chewing on and figuring out in the background is to say, I do not see how affordable housing is going to happen without a strong integration of nonprofits. So you're like, okay, great. But who are the nonprofits who are in our region who can do this, right? So that's a really important thing we need to look at as a community, and to say, who are the nonprofits that can do that? Also, when nonprofits put housing together, a lot of the times, they're not necessarily the builder. So you have to integrate with private. So for me, affordable housing going forward really is, as Xander put on one of his slides there, an integration between, municipal, nonprofit, private, government. It's going to take everybody together. And some people point to municipalities right away too and say, well, okay, you gotta sell your soul for affordable housing too. And they say, okay, well, how do I do that? How do I make that part of my long-term sustainability piece as well? Like Glenn said, crunch the numbers, right? Are you gonna get the assessment that's gonna help to offset it? Is $1 pieces of land the answer? Is borrowing money for different pieces? These become more complex equations that go into the background, and it's gonna require integration of multiple partners to pull these things together. When I've talked with some local developers, they've said, Kendall, 20 years ago, 30 years ago, I built affordable housing. No problem, I could do it. I can't do it today. As a private developer, I cannot build affordable housing today. So we need to listen to that and say, what does that mean? And how do we roll that over? Do we need to advocate that private developers can qualify for more things? Do we need to look at nonprofit private partnerships? We need creative solutions moving forward, and I don't have the answers necessarily. So we need people to keep coming with them and pulling them together.
Well, the thing about not-profit is, let's face it, profit is what does drive the economy. So I agree that not-for-profit is a big factor, but we have a lot of housing that should be relatively low cost that is very expensive. And it's very expensive because of supply and demand. And so if we build nice apartments that the school teachers who can't get an apartment in our area go to, and we increase the supply, we will some of the not so nice places that are really expensive will get cheaper. So, the economy can't all be just the government.
A lot of people seem to be confused about the term not-for-profit or non-profit. They think that it means you cannot make a profit, but that is wrong. Okay, if you don't make a profit, you will not survive.
Nope.
Okay, non-profit is a tax designation and nothing more. Okay, what it is you predetermine where your profits will go, and basically they go back into the organization that made those profits. Okay. But that's a predetermination, and therefore you pay no taxes on it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's important to realize too. Yep. Okay, those are my thoughts.
The supply chain that you guys are having a problem with is the simple fact that labor's not available to do all the demands. So, is there any point in providing simulation and training models that allow computer games to be used as a way of training people before they go on site to actually do their job, to simulate the build environment prior to, so that they can increase the speed and efficiency and reduce the amount of errors and mistakes, because they actually know what they're doing because they practice. Mm-hmm. Is that something that might help reduce the overall cost, because we would be increasing the amount of available labor that is effective of being able to do it and reduce the barrier of that labor so that they don't need the same level of certification?
Yeah, I think you need to do two things. One, you need to increase the workforce that can do this, and this was part of the May 4th conversation. That was one of the breakout groups that was held in St. John on May 4th. And there's a few things. One, they said, really, we can't push enough people through the system. We can't train enough. We need to look at immigration, and I'm finally having housing contractors open to the dialogue of immigration. It's a different scenario than they were in 5 years ago, where 5 years ago they were like, I can find work anywhere. I have a hard time keeping the people employed. Now they're saying, I can't find the people. And NBCC and other trainers are saying, we can't push the people through fast enough. So we need to get certification recognition for people coming in with experience. I've had a recent dialogue with NBCC about this. They are becoming, thanks partly to the pandemic, more creative on what their program delivery looks like. And so I can't speak exactly are they doing that, but I think their minds are opening more to that. Remote learning, more stuff maybe online that complements the in-person, and revising that programming. And then the other thing that is happening in dialogue, so I've been in dialogue with a few different industries over the past couple of years, looking more at production housing, right? So we're going to have what we would call, stick build, modular build kind of housing for the foreseeable future, but we need to start integrating more efficient forms of getting it out. It's got to get out faster, like with our workforce. So looking at production line housing coming out. So that's another, that solution still has to be cracked, but to me that's part of the answer going forward. We don't have enough people to physically build from a supply chain perspective, so those are some of the other creative solutions to help address that.
I'm just hearing about all this homeless people, so I go, we do have the labor, we just aren't motivating them. We aren't connecting the one into the other to make them, to facilitate the easy answer, the easy conversion of you can be part of your own solution.
Mm-hmm. A lot of people who are in an unsheltered situation often have so many barriers to be able to do the work, right? So that's part of the other address. How are the people who are not participating in the workforce, what are their challenges and their barriers? Are we helping them to actually walk through those so they can become part of the workforce? And what percentage can? Some, like a percentage maybe won't be able to, but what percentage can? What are we doing to get there? Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Let's just have a conversation. Sorry. Yeah. No, we're off agenda. Let's just do it.
These guys are awesome. Just want to add two things that actually, you mentioned NBCC. So again, through events like this and meeting people, so NBCC, I'm just going to read this from NBC's website, but they recently started a program called FAST, NB, short for Facilitating Access to Skills Talent. And I'm just going to read their two-sentence blurb here. Companies in New Brunswick are experiencing labor shortages, especially in skilled trades such as carpentry, welding, millwright, machinist, plumbing, electrical. The FAST program platform can fast-track connecting employers with a skilled immigrant talent pool and help newcomers and potential new immigrants match their skills with trades career opportunities in New Brunswick. So that's a program NBCC started now. I had something else to add to that, and
time, maybe we can do a reality check because of the construction people in the room. Is that, I don't know if you're willing, but is that a fair comment for those involved in construction?
Definitely. We got to definitely. It was a fair comment.
We're a private construction company, and we give up. I would have said 2 years ago we gave up as much work as we did. Now we give up 3-4 times as much work as what we actually do, and we could grow exponentially, but the workforce is not available.
Yeah, that's very true. And I'll just add, actually, just remember the other thing I'll add to that. So some of you in the room may be familiar, heard of the organization in Moncton called Rising Tide. It's a not-for-profit organization that raised funding from the municipal, provincial, federal government this year. The president of Rising Tide also happens to be the president of the food bank in Moncton. His name is Dale Hicks. Dale's a fantastic character. But actually on the evening of May 4th in the hospitality suite, he was telling me about an initiative he's starting with the food bank. And here's how conversations like this can lend themselves to progress and accelerating innovation. He is starting a scholarship pool of funding he's raising through the private sector and who we would raise funding for the food bank to put aside scholarship funding for youth at risk to help them get into the skilled trades. So picture you're in grade 10 or 11 and you're working on the construction site and you're thinking, geez, maybe I can make more money, blah, 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 but it's a little difficult. I'm not sure if I can. My family's at risk. And then you come along and say, you know what? We got the funding to help you get through a red seal and, carpentry or electrician or something like that. So I said to Dale, that's something that everyone in this province should know about. So imagine, strange place for it to come from, but imagine that happening around the province as well. That could bring a lot of youth out of situations we're in right now. So anyway, I just want to share that. So I'll sit down.
No, thanks, Peter. My hope was after this session we get into kind of an open conversation. We're kind of already there. So I do want to give Heather a chance to speak about some of the community and social health impacts of not having enough housing and the work that she does, because she's really tirelessly everywhere in our communities and sees a whole lot. So I think it would be very valuable to hear from her, but I think this is an incredibly valuable conversation. And so we're going to pick it up after a break, after Heather, and keep thinking about it, because it's really important. I think that's we can, and technological solutions, we have to look at the fact that we do have a labor shortage, and what's the point of saying we need this many units if there aren't the people to build them? And so there has to be, I don't know exactly what the solution is, but technological from training, technological from how we're building, supply chain improvement, basically. And so that's why I like having engineers here, because you guys think in a really different way than I will ever think, to be honest. But with that, we're going to move from the engineering to the actual social, and Heather.